So with authentic texts, we have a big problem. I mean, they are great. You bring a bit of real life into the class. Definition of authentic text, by the way, is a text written for a native speaker, not purpose written for a learner. So these days, something that we would take from the internet, in the old days, a magazine, newspaper article. So they are great, they're very motivating, they're very topical, you can bring in something about what's happening right now, but the problem is that the vocabulary is a very high level, and you end up wasting a lot of time in class because students do this. Read, 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 stop, unknown word, look up, write in the margin, read, 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 stop, unknown word, look up, write in the margin, and they get to the end and they've got a list of not very useful low-frequency words which you've spent a lot of time in class translating and explaining, and they haven't understood much. So here is my solution, and my solution is that students for homework should do a mind map of the article. So I give them a kind of idea first, so the title of the article can go in the middle. The main points of the article can go in the inner ring. That'll often be 1 point for each paragraph, but not necessarily. If it's a long text, you could say, what are the 3 or the 4 main points? And then for each main point, they can actually write down a key word or phrase, or 2 or 3 that come from the article. What do? They do that for homework and come back into the next class with that mind map, but not with the original article. They then work in pairs and they use the mind map, not the article, to explain to their partner what it was about. And you can cue student B, the one that's listening, with some questions like, can you tell me a little more about that? Or, I'm sorry, I don't understand, can you explain that again? And the whole thing works really well as a fluency exercise and gets right past that problem of trying to translate and understand all the low-frequency words. You get straight to the meaning with your mind map, and you get to the important words with the words that you write around the edge, those at the very edge of the mind map. Okay, you'll find more about that when you download the slides. Okay, let's move on to tip 2. So we've been talking about authentic texts, and it's very easy just for someone like me just to give you loads and loads and loads of sites. Oh, here's a great site, here's a great site, go and look at this, go and look at that. It's a bit like kind of apps, you know, it's like you can go to a lot of talks where you get a catwalk with lots of apps or lots of websites. Well, I've just really selected 4 that I use a lot in my class. Some of them will be known to you, some of them won't. And I think these are great places to go for authentic text. So the first one is Knowledge at Wharton. So that's Wharton Business School, and the faculty there, they put up articles, and I've shown you on the screen grab here the different topics: finance, innovation, leadership, marketing, and I guess they post to that every week. They're very topical and surprisingly easy to understand, because the language is a bit academic, which makes it a bit formal, which actually makes it easier to understand. But maybe articles a little bit on the long side. I would say upper intermediate, okay, intermediate not. Now, lots of people know about TED, but surprisingly, quite a lot of people don't. A great source for 20-minute talks by thought leaders in various fields. You get the script right there on the screen. Those of you who know about TED probably use it often. Those of you who don't know about TED, you're going to start using it often. I watch TED Talks just for pleasure. They're a part of my life. The next is SlideShare. SlideShare is to PowerPoint what YouTube is to videos. So it has hundreds of thousands of PowerPoint slideshows. So for example, this slideshow, I'll probably post there on my own site. But if you use their search engine, any topic that you can think of, particularly things related to marketing, you'll get right into some really good slideshows that people have uploaded there for free, just like people upload videos to YouTube. Bloomberg Business Week, for breaking business news, I actually prefer Bloomberg to Economist, which is its rival. I subscribe to The Economist personally, but I find the language quite dry and all the double meaning humour and stuff is quite difficult for learners. So I think this is quite good for like breaking news. Okay, I'm moving right along now to my tip number 3. My tip number 3 is a warmer for social English. Social English is one of those topics where it's like everything, so what is it? So this is a really, really easy, simple, guaranteed, fun warmer. I'm going to read the instructions for this one off the screen here. So number 1, you write really and really on the board, elicit the meaning, lots of funny listen and repeat. So with your students, really? And they all go, really? Really? And they all go, really? Introduce the idea of echo words. Ask one student to tell you about what they did last weekend, and you echo key words and phrases as a model. So this is something that we would do in our own language, but students have to think about it and just get a little bit of practice. So you just pick someone and they say, oh yeah, last weekend I went to see a new movie, and you just go, new movie? And they go, yeah, you know, it was that one where they leave the Earth and go on a spaceship, and you just go, oh, go on a spaceship. And you just keep echoing things, and that's your demo to the students for how to keep someone else talking. So number 3, students work in pairs to do the previous activity. So once student A talks about what they did at the weekend, student B echoes words and occasionally says, really? Or, oh, really? Then number 4, you introduce the idea of asking questions to keep the other person talking. Again, a model for everybody. You ask one student to tell you about their last holiday, and you ask questions. So according to the language level, you could keep your questions very simple, like where did you eat in the evening, or did you go to the beach? But you're basically just modeling it. And then number 5, students work in pairs to do the previous activity themselves. So at this point, they've practiced really echo words and questions, talking about very easy things, what they did at the weekend and what they did on their last holiday. At number 6, they're going to work in pairs to put it all together, echo, really, and questions. And now let's get them talking about something a little bit more serious, something job related, such as a current project. And that's just a really fun, easy thing. Okay, tip number 4, I'm going to go past quite fast. Ever since I've started teaching business English, and I guess a lot of you also, I've taught maybe 30–40% of my students have been one-to-one. And right from the beginning, I always recorded one-to-one. Now, these days I teach one-to-one, but I also teach small groups up to 6. I wouldn't use my recorder if there was 6, but I would use it if there was 2 or 3 or 4. The one I've showing you in the bottom right of the screen is the one that I actually use. That's the actual product. You can, of course, use a smartphone. The only thing about that is that you've got to be very comfortable with how to rewind just a little bit. And also, it's important that you put it on the desk so kind of between you and the students, so that as you're playing it back, they also can pause it, they also can rewind a little bit. And I just find with a smartphone that's a little bit difficult. So I use this little Sony, and I record, of course, role plays, of course, presentations, but I actually just keep it on the whole time, really. Even if students come into the class and it's a small group and they're telling you about what they did last night and the lesson hasn't really started, well, that's actually social English. And you've got it there, and you can choose to play it back or not. And just to emphasize, again, the really important thing of leaving it on the table so that they also can pause and rewind, because probably they know in their minds, oh yes, at that point I was trying to think of a word, but I couldn't think of it. And then they can pause and they could say, how do I say blah, blah, blah in English? Okay. Tip number 5, when an exercise is difficult. Yeah, this is one which I'll tell you about it, but you may want to go back and read it afterwards. This is for those situations where you need to rescue a class because you go around the room, oh my God, everyone's getting it wrong, no one understands, this exercise is much too difficult, it's not at their level, I haven't prepared them, and you see a big hole opening up in the class which you're going to jump into. So what do you do? So this is how I rescue a lesson. I say, okay, everybody, pens down. And I could say that even if they're just halfway through, as soon as I realize that it's too difficult. Pens down. And then I say, okay, get a piece of paper and cover up the exercise, but just leave number 1 showing. And then I say, now I'm just going to give you a silent moment to think of the answer. Just have a look. So it could be a gap fill. It could be a, put the verb into the correct tense. It could be all of those exercises. I say, okay, I'm going to give you a moment's silence. And then I give them a moment's silence. And then I say to everybody, okay, so the answer should be, and then the whole class can chorally call out the answer. Some will be right, some will be wrong, there'll be a lot of laughter, that's fine. And then I just say what the correct answer is and why, very, very briefly. And then I ask them to move their piece of paper down to have a look at question number 2, and we go over the same thing for question number 2, and then the next piece of paper down for number 3. All this time, they've had pens down, and they're just thinking, and then chorally calling out the answer. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. We get to the end, and they say, okay, now pick up your pens, go back to number 1, work with a partner, and do the exercise again. And by now, they've actually heard the answers, they've heard me explain them, and they should be able to now do it. You've made it much easier for them. Tip number 6 is a bit of a funny one. It's to do with drawing, funny drawings on the board. Now, again, when do I do this? So I would do this at any occasion when the students have got a drop in motivation. So you look around the group and they're, oh, we're never going to learn English, or oh, this is really hard. And you think, okay, at this point, I need to do something to motivate them. And what I do is I just take 3 or 4 minutes in class to do one or the other, but not both, of these funny drawings which I sketch on the board. The one on the left has got competence in the vertical axis and time on the right. And I just very quickly on the board sketch this kind of jagged line, some bits going up, some bits going down, perhaps some long plateaus. And I just ask them, now, I'd like you to think about other kinds of learning that you did. So, for example, learning a musical instrument, and then look around. Who can play the guitar, for example? Or think about when you learned how to drive. Who learned how to drive? They'll all say yes. Now, was your learning straight up, like that, or were there periods when you didn't seem to be making very much progress, when it was flat, and were there even times when it seemed to go down? And of course, they'll all say, oh yes, that's right, it definitely wasn't straight up. So you say, okay, so language learning is just like that. It's no different. It's actually very similar to learning a musical instrument. There are times when it's just going to be flat, when you're going to feel that you're not making very much progress. Don't worry. Your brain's just doing stuff that it needs to do. Think back to those times when you learnt the guitar or you learnt how to drive and you also felt that you weren't making very much progress. And in fact, sometimes you even felt that you were going backwards. The other drawing that I do, and it's an either or, it's not both, is I do a funny sketch of a person's head like this. And so we've got a brain. We've got, and the little green things are language items. So I make a little funny kind of joke. And I say, well, that first little box, that's the present perfect. And that second little box, that's 5 collocations related to marketing. And now, the stuff can go in through, you can see it through your eye, or you can hear it through your ear. And that's the first stage of language learning. That's awareness. That's when it goes on your radar. You didn't know it was there previously, now you do. All of that has to go up to your brain on a kind of production line, an assembly line. And in your brain, it needs to go round and round. Every time that you do another exercise, every time that you read something again, every time that you hear something again, it's going round and round in your brain. And there's a physical process of neurons coming together and synapses joining. And that all takes time. But at a certain point, that production line is going to come out of your brain to your mouth, and active speech is going to come out. Now, all of that takes time. So don't worry. If there's something that you don't understand, okay, you've got to get to that first point. If you are aware of it, you know about it, but you just can't say it, don't worry. It's just going round and round in your brain. Give it time. It will come out eventually. So basically what I'm doing with those two kind of sketches is trying in a funny way to actually talk seriously about how learning and language awareness takes place. Okay, my tip number 7 is silence during feedback. I mean silence during feedback at the board. Okay, again, I'll talk about this. You don't have to read the slide, and you can go back and read the slide afterwards. So you've made your language feedback notes. The students have been talking. Maybe they've done a role play. Maybe you've had a discussion. And you've got your notes on your piece of paper. And now you're going to go to the board and you're going to teach. This is your feedback slot. And what I do, and what most people do, is they write up on the board the words that they heard the students say. So let's imagine that you heard your students say, I have been working in this job since 2 years, and you know that it should be for 2 years. So what I do is I write up the words that I hear. I have been working in this job since 2 years. Doesn't matter who said them. One of the group did. And this is my tip. My tip is to not immediately start eliciting and explaining and using concept questions, but to leave silence. So I move away from the board and I look up to see the phrase that I've just written. I move away as a visual indication that they should look to see what I've written and think about it. And I leave about 5 seconds silence, like this. Okay, students, so what do you think about that? I've been working in this job since 2 years. And then you just look around, and if you see some students who really want to answer, of course, you can choose them, and one of them will say, oh, it should be for 2 years, yeah. And then you can, if you want to, ask them why, but I want to keep it moving, so I would probably say, that's right, it should be for with a period of time, since with a point in time, 2 years. And then I would move on. And if I looked around and no one knew the answer, then I would start with my concept questions, and I would say things like, so it's 2 years. Is that a period of time or a point in time? Okay, it's a period of time, 2 years, so it should be, and then I would point to the word since. And I would do all of that stuff, but my tip is to leave the silence before moving to all of that eliciting, because in that silence, the students are attempting to activate their passive knowledge. In that silence, the student is thinking this in their brain. Okay, I have been working, yeah, I think that's okay, verb form, yeah. Okay, in this company, yeah, that preposition, in this company, yeah, that's okay. Since 2 years, now the 2 years is definitely okay. Oh, since. Oh, wait a minute. I think, oh, wasn't I doing an exercise on that in Paul Emmerson's Business Grammar Builder the other day? Oh, maybe it should be for. And all of that's going through their brain like in a snap sort of moment, and that's actually language, that's actually what you're doing there, is you're getting passive understanding to become active. You're forcing those neuronal connections to be made. So that's my tip. Give them that silence to let their brains work and activate their passive knowledge. Okay, my next tip, number 8, is intercultural awareness. Now, intercultural awareness, like social English, is one of those things which is like everything and nothing. So how can we do it in a quick, simple way? I don't know about you, but whenever I do a lesson on intercultural awareness, what tends to happen is that we get into stereotypes very quickly, you know, and then sort of as soon as we're talking about stereotypes, then immediately someone else will say, oh, but I know somebody from that country who isn't like that. And the whole lesson goes by just with, you know, these sort of silly conversations about, you know, yes, Americans are more direct than British people. Oh, no, but I know a British person who isn't, blah, blah, blah. So this is my kind of 1 hour lesson for intercultural awareness that I think works really well. And then you can do anything that you want to after this. So what you have to do is you have to type, and it's my first arrow there, you have to type the Lewis model of culture into a search engine and look under the images tab. And if you do, you will find this blue diagram. You'll find it's almost the very first one that comes up in Google Images if you just type out something like the Lewis model of culture. And you show the students this diagram, and you give them a few minutes to look at it. Now, the important thing here is to look at the corners of the triangle, and Richard Lewis calls this top corner multi-active, and he calls the bottom left corner linear active, and he calls the bottom right corner reactive. So what he means by that, and you can explain this to the students just to get them started, multi-active means that you're comfortable doing many things at the same time. Linear active in the bottom left means that you do one thing and you do it properly and you finish it, and then you move on to something else and you do that and you finish it. And reactive in the bottom right means that you wait to see what other people say or what happens in the world and you react to it. By the way, for the moment, we're ignoring whether this is true or false. We're ignoring whether this is a good model or not. We're just looking at the model. At the end, of course, you can then talk about it. Now, then you say to the students, what other values and behaviors do the 3 corners of the triangle represent? And you can elicit 1 or 2 more from them if you want to help to get them started. It's very nice to have this as adjectives. And also I tend to say to them, try to make things neutral or positive. Try not to be negative. So don't say something like, people from this country are cold, because that's very rude. Say, instead, people from this country don't show their feelings openly. And then I give them a long time of silence to really study this model and to think in groups of 2 or 3 the values and the behaviors of the three different corners. The more you get into it, the more you'll find it's fascinating. So, for example, Canada, the middle of the bottom, quite a long way from the USA on that bottom left-hand corner, and so on. Then they can feed back to you, you can talk about it, and of course there are answers. There are Richard Lewis's own answers. You'll find them in exactly the same page in Google Images that you did when you typed out the Lewis model, or you can simply take them from this slideshow. Here are the answers: linear active, multi-active, and reactive. So we're not going to read through all of these, but let's just have a quick look. Linear active talks half the time, multi-active talks most of the time, reactive listens most of the time. Let's look at the 4th row down. Linear active, polite but direct, multi-active, emotional, reactive, polite and indirect. Of course, the concept of face, very important for the reactive cultures. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th row. So linear active dislikes losing face, multi-active has good excuses, and reactive must not lose face. Now, having done all of that in class, of course you then have a discussion, is this model right or wrong? And it may be completely wrong, but at least you've got something to work with. At least you've got some content there to disagree with, and you've moved beyond that sort of anecdote and, you know, kind of telling stories. Okay, let's move on to tip number 9. Use teacher talking time mindfully. Now, when I did my initial teacher training, we did one of those teacher training courses where we teach and then the students are in front of us in a semicircle and all of our colleagues are behind them watching us teach, and we watch also our own colleagues. And the most shocking thing about doing that, if you've ever done it, is how much the teachers talk. They talk far too much. We teachers don't need speaking practice, as students do. But I want to make the opposite point. I want to say, okay, you're going to talk, but do your teacher talking in a mindful way. Now, I'm just going to give you 2 examples of that. The first one is how to correct or interfere or intervene while students are doing a role play. Now, if your students are in 2s or 3s and they're doing a role play or just having a conversation about something interesting, some text, and you go over and a student calls you over and you start explaining something, what's going to happen is that all the other groups are going to stop talking because the teacher is talking, it must be important, they're explaining something, I don't want to miss this, and you're going to kill that speaking activity stone dead. So you should, if a student calls you over to ask you, just say the very minimum in a low voice and then withdraw physically and withdraw your eye contact, but write it down so that at the end in your feedback slot you can explain it to everybody. My second example of how to use teacher talking time mindfully is with a text, an authentic text. Now, one of the biggest wastes of time in the world, in my opinion, is with an authentic text, is getting students in turn around the group to read a paragraph turn by turn. When I did that, learning Portuguese, I just hated it, waiting for my paragraph to come, you know, as they went around the group. And you know, if you do want students to read aloud, you've at least got to give them some models and some practice first. Don't just put them on the spot with no rehearsal and say, now read. Instead, you read it. So this activity is for the teacher to read a text aloud at number 1, and the students just close their eyes. Just close your eyes and enjoy it. It's like a bedtime story. And then at number 2, they can talk together in pairs. They haven't made notes. They've just had a bedtime story read to them. It just happens to be a business article from Bloomberg. And can they remember the main points? Then at number 3, you can read it again, and this time ask them to write down the key vocabulary that they hear. The students still haven't seen the article. This is a listening exercise. Now you, with your voice, you will really bring out the meaning, and you'll really bring out the key vocabulary. So let's have a look at that number 4. If I was reading it to my students, I might say, students in pairs, compare what they wrote down. And everyone in the room would write down the word compare. So I can choose what language to focus on with my voice. Much better than the students just passively reading it. Then at number 5, you can hand out the text, read it aloud again if you want to, and they just follow. They just follow while you're like the listening that's on the CD, but you're just reading it. And at the end, at number 6, they can check the answers to 2 and 3. So they could check whether they got the main points and check whether they got the key vocab, because it's only at number 5 that they actually see the text. So think about reading it aloud yourself rather than them. Much more useful. And now let's come on to my final tip, which is tip 10. Remember pronunciation. Now, in my classes, I do a lot of pronunciation work. I do a lot of listen and repeat. This is just a little glimpse of the kind of things that I do. So drilling, I do a lot of drilling. Word stress, for me, this is the biggest single pronunciation problem. I think if a student gets an individual phoneme wrong, it rarely spoils understanding. If a Japanese gets a l or a r wrong, or a German gets a v or a w wrong, it's not going to spoil the understanding, but word stress will. So if you say something like analysis instead of analysis, people genuinely might not be able to understand you. So I drill and I use my hands and I beat it. So I'll go analysis. Okay, you're all going to be kind of students now. I'm just very quickly going into role as a teacher. Okay, everybody, listen, listen, analysis. Listen, analysis. Everybody, analysis. 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 Good. And the students, please. And you. Okay, and now turn to your partner and say analysis. And at that point, there'll be a lot of laughter, which is great. So choral, listen and repeat. Then just ask 1 or 2 students to check, and then just turn to your partner and say it, and there'll be laughter, and it'll be funny, and that's good. Plenty of evidence in the literature that when we learn a word, we learn the word stress with that word, and that saying it with the correct word stress really helps us remember it. With the second drilling is with the whole functional phrase. Listen, everybody, just listen. Can I just interrupt for a moment? Can I just interrupt for a moment? Everybody, can I just interrupt for a moment? Can I just interrupt for a moment? And again, chorally, 3, 4, 5 times. Ask 1 or 2 people just to check that people have got it, and then turn to your partner and say it. Sentence stress for presentations, my third point there. This is very important. Each sentence has 1 or 2 keywords, and within each of these keywords, the stress syllable needs really stressing. Drill an example, then students do it for their own short text. Let's take that paragraph that you're looking at that I've just read, and I'll give you an example. Each sentence has 1 or 2 keywords. And within each of these keywords, the stress syllable needs really stressing. Okay, so we can take a very short piece of text, a paragraph, and we can really decide on which words are important. Within those words, the syllable that is stressed is going to be really stressed, and that's going to bring out the meaning. As well as stressing, we've also got the fourth thing, which is pausing. And you're going to use pausing and also stressing when you give a presentation, when you speak in a meeting or in any formal context. So pausing, very important. We need an example. We always need a model first. For this webinar, let's take the actual one, the actual fourth point there, pausing for dramatic effect presentations. I'm going to read that next little bit of text. I'm going to pause for dramatic effect. This brings out the meaning and gives the audience a moment to absorb the information. Drill an example. Then, students do it for their own short text, one paragraph. Okay, that was a little bit silly. I did it for this because it's something which we're all reading, but you do it for a real paragraph from a real text, and you need to combine sentence stress and pausing, and they can do it in a very controlled way, just with one single paragraph, and it really brings out the meaning, it creates impact, it creates interest, it gets over that problem of students speaking in a very flat voice, and it can be done by all levels. Okay, so timing's looking good. I've come to the end of my 10 top tips. It's showing 37 minutes. I'm just going to take a minute to tell you a little bit about my two websites, and then we'll have some questions. So my first one is a website that's been there since 2010. It's about 4 years old. It's a website for teachers. It's got my own name, www.paulemmerson.com, and here I have slideshows, articles, videos, and so on. So for example, if you look there, latest slideshow, you'll see that on the left, 12 activities to integrate pronunciation. So the things I've just been talking about just now, discussed in more detail there. There's an article, Be Here, Be There, an adventure in e-learning, and so on. And you'll look, if you look across to the right where it says store, you'll see that I sell my self-published photocopyable resource book management lessons there. That's for you, that's for teachers. My new thing, which is brand new, only 3 weeks old, is a website for learners, so that's for your students. It's called Be Here, Be There. That stands for Business English Here, Business English There. And at the moment, it's got some stuff under Talk Business and Business Bites. Talk Business is an interview with one of my students, a German guy in the auto industry. The video of me interviewing him is the center of the course, but then there's pre-listening questions, there's post-listening questions, and then the main thing about my site is there's actually me narrating PowerPoint slides that are made to look like a whiteboard. So you actually get my voice and a whiteboard with words appearing in it. So you actually, the student is actually taught. There's actually explicit teaching. That could be vocabulary development or lots of other stuff. And there's something under Business Bites. Take a look. The content will be added to slowly because it's only me doing it, all on my own. It's nothing to do with any publisher, nothing to do with any language school. This is an entirely self-funded thing. But I had a lot of fun doing it, and it's going to build up slowly. And please recommend it to your students. And that's all, I think. So the timing's looking good. It's showing 40 minutes. So, Henry, do you want to come back on? You've been looking at all the chats and maybe pick out a few questions.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Perfect timing, guys. you've been writing messages in the chat box. Let me pick some of the best questions we've got. Okay, Paul, Ira is asking, what's your top tip for one-to-one classes?
Yeah, so I've already given that tip of using a recorder, and I mean, I just always use that. It's just always on. I mean, so really you're asking me for my second tip, and I mean, my second tip is something that I think if you teach one-to-one, you'll do it anyway, which is abandon the lesson plan very quickly. So, you know, you've gone to the trouble to photocopy a unit from the course book that you think your student is going to like, but your student is saying, oh, something terrible happened at work today, and this happened and that happened. Now, don't sort of pretend that hasn't happened and go back to your photocopies. You stick with it. Oh, tell me more about that. And you just get them talking about what's in their mind, and it's just a great fluency thing. So don't attempt to sort of divert from what they want to talk about. If they want to talk about anything, a difficult telephone call they've just had, problems they're having with their children, let them talk about it. And all you need to do is just start writing your language feedback notes, or have that audio recorder on. And at the end, give them some solid language feedback. Make sure that you have time to give them that language feedback. You don't want them to walk out of the class and say, all we did today was talk.
Great, thanks, Paul. The second question comes from Lilia, and she's very keen to know about how you can prepare students for being interrupted in conversation, which is something that naturally happens when we talk to each other. How can you go about getting them used to that sort of situation?
So Richard Lewis, in his books, talking about the three different sort of corners of the triangle, he makes a very funny kind of drawing where you get person A and person B. And in person A and person B, in the multi-active culture, they're all talking all at the same time, ignoring the other one, blah, 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 blah. In the linear active, one person talks, they finish, and then the next person talks, and they finish, and then the next person talks. And in the reactive, a person talks, and then there's a short period of silence, a couple of seconds. And when I have Japanese students in my class, I really notice that. And in that short period of silence, you're sort of thinking about what the other person said and showing respect for it. So the first thing that I would do is I would actually put those up on the board so people realize there is a cultural difference. And then I would say, okay, if you come from a reactive culture, you're going to have to fight to speak. Because all of these multi-actives, all of these Italians and Brazilians, they're not going to wait. They're not going to give you that moment of silence. You're going to have to fight. And I want to see you fight to speak. Now, all of you multi-actives, you're going to have to be a little bit culturally sensitive, and you're going to have just to wait for the other people to finish before you speak. Now, but to give a more specific answer to the question, I think you have to teach a phrase or two or three. So I think you have to teach a polite phrase like, I'm sorry, could I just finish? Or, I'm sorry, could I just make my point? Or, I'll come back to you in a moment. Can I just finish my idea? And I think you have to actually just choose one of those and teach it and drill it and have some fun in class. Kind of practice it so they can be speaking and you as a teacher deliberately can interrupt. And what you're looking for is them to say that phrase in a very nice, polite way.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. I hope that dealt with your question, Lilia. We've got a couple more minutes with Paul here, so if there's any last questions, please enter them in the chat box now. Okay, Adriana's very keen to know about whether a lot of the tips mentioned in your presentation could also be applied to teenagers and children as well, Paul. What's your take on that?
I've just come back from Salzburg in Austria, where I've done a couple of teacher training sessions in higher education institutions there, and the teachers there were mostly teaching sort of 16 to 22-year-olds. I think most of them were teaching like that period just after you leave high school, like 18 to 21. And they found that most of the tips could be also used, maybe a little bit changed, adapted, modified, but yeah. But I've got to say that that's not my own teaching situation, and so it's not something where I have a lot of kind of experience. You probably need to go to a different webinar to get those kinds of tips.
Okay, I hope that helped, Adriano. We might have time for one last question. Paul, you've had an offer in to go and train teachers in Malaysia there, so
yeah, well, that's absolutely.
Please contact Paul.
Yeah, that's absolutely great. You can contact me from my site, paulemmerson.com, or from the Be Here, Be There site. Plenty of contact pages. They'll come straight into my email, and so that's absolutely great.
Excellent. And I'm going to share a link as well to some of Paul's work for us with Macmillan. You can get a lot of his business titles through our site too. Does anyone have a final question then before we go?
I just noticed one flashing up there actually in the chat box, which says you interrupt students for correction when they're talking. And so, and I think I did refer to that in my talk. My answer, my personal answer to that is no, because I think, but I write down the error and go back to it at the end at the board, because I think if you correct a student in a fluency exercise, you're giving them a mixed message. Are we doing this for fluency, or are we doing this for accuracy? Come on, teacher. We should know. If we're doing it for fluency, we're lost in our world of meaning, thinking about what we're going to say next, and we're interested in what we're saying, and we're interested in what other people are saying, and we're not so worried about accuracy. But if you want us to be accurate, that's a different thing. We need to speak slowly, we need to speak carefully, we need to think about what is the language form that we're focusing on, and I don't think you should send those mixed messages. So I personally never interrupt students to correct an error when they're speaking. I write it down, yes, and I go back to it at the board at the end, yes. I would interrupt them simply to supply a word that they don't know. So if a student is trying to talk and they can't finish the sentence, and maybe they know the word in their own language and they say it in their own language, then I just quickly give it, just so they can keep on talking.
Excellent. That's an interesting point. So we've had lots of positive comments come in, Paul, about the talk. And don't forget, it's been recorded, so you can catch it all again on our website from next week. Paul, we're coming to the end now, so do you want to say a few quick words to everyone who's come to the webinar today?
Well, thanks very much, everyone. I'll also be at BZIG, just like John, so if you're there, come up and say hello. And all I could say is please encourage your students to have a look at Be Here, Be There. I'm doing it all myself. It takes me months and months. The time that I do it, I get no income. So it would be, my reward is lots of people all over the world using it, looking at it, and that's it. So I'll finish with a little sales plug for my e-learning website.
Excellent stuff. Yeah, do check it out, guys. And we've had 580 people here today, which is fantastic, from all across the world. So I'm going to stop the recording, and then we've got our next session at 2 o'clock our time, so in an hour, which is just a Google Hangout with me, where you can ask any questions about technical problems or the talks coming up throughout the rest of the week. And I'll share the link in a second.
Henry, can people download my slide deck very easily from here, from this site?
Yeah, they'll be available by the end of the week from the site. So they're not up there yet. We'll turn them into a PDF, and then they'll go up on the online conference site. And I'll share the link around in an email, and I'll send it over to Paul as well, so you can add it to your sites too.
Okay.
When it's ready. So yeah, there will be a copy available, and the recording is going to go up on YouTube too, as well as our website. So there's a few different formats you can watch it back in.
Great.
Okay then, guys. So let's say bye to Paul now. Thanks again for a great talk.